All right, so how's everybody love those baristas, huh? A round of applause for that. I mean, I was telling Bob that already makes this the best UX conference I've ever been to, because usually the coffee really sucks, and coffee is important to me. I'm from California. So coffee, wine snobbery, yes, all those things. So today I'm going to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart. It's something that I've struggled with in my career, I'd say, for the last 11 years of the career, and has this tension between love and money. And that's the tension that I'm sure you've all experienced when you design products and trying to figure out, how do I drive consumer engagement and monetization and not have those be in conflict with each other? How do I have my organization do the work we want to do and not be dragged down by revenue constraints? And then your own career. As you're looking at trying to advance in your career, it's a critical question. How do I keep doing the work that I love? But let's be honest, how do I make more money? I mean, we all want to make a little more money. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Very briefly, in my career, I got my start, believe it or not, in psychology. So I studied human-computer interaction at Rice University. And then I really worked on design for the first time at IBM. And I can't say that I designed for love or money at that time. It was really just trying to make things work. Usability was a big thing back then. You know, you would boot your PC and then you'd go have breakfast and come back. And I'm not kidding. You'd come back after breakfast and hopefully it was booted by that time. So you were just happy if stuff didn't crash. Really got introduced to designing products for consumer love and engagement at Apple. And we designed down to the pixel. I had carpal tunnel syndrome for years, actually, because I'm not kidding. I actually designed in ResEdit. Anybody know what ResEdit is? So it's a resource editor. And I would design stuff down to the pixel, the actual shadows and all that kind of stuff. Very tedious work. But the funny thing was I didn't have to worry about money. You know, I worked on the Finder and the operating system and things like that. And at that point at Apple, we really didn't think about revenue or money. Yeah, and it showed. But very interesting. At eBay, I was introduced to money in a big way. This is where we really had to think about how to design drive conversion for the company, how to design revenue for the company. And then at Yahoo, it really came to a head, I would say, because Yahoo does care about engagement. They care about the customer experience, they care about brand, but they also care about revenue. I worked on the search team. I was actually the head of consumer products for search there, and I moved into product management. And believe you me, I had to care a lot about revenue. It drove, and probably still does, more than half of the revenue for the company. So it wasn't just, oh, can we make search pretty and engaging? It was, can we drive revenue to keep the company alive? And now I have my own product strategy and design consultancy, Brilliant Forge, and I work with smaller companies and startups. And of course, they're trying to get consumer traction and engagement, but they're also trying to survive. They usually have a little bit of money, and if they can get to revenue and survive, then they will make it. If they don't, they're done. And so it's a huge issue for them. This lovely illustration I made, I'm not a visual designer, I think you'll see that already, really comes from me remembering a conversation I had with a young designer that I'd hired fresh out of school. And she was distraught. We were having our one-on-one, and she was really upset, and got to the bottom of it. And it was really the fact that she felt like she was being constrained by having to think about revenue for the product that she was working on. She was having to design revenue features into the product. And she said, if only I didn't have to worry about this damn money, I could design something that was really wonderful that the customers would love and not have to worry about trying to weave in this monetization. And the reality is you have to. I mean, we're not working for nonprofits. We need to drive revenue for our companies. And so what I hope I can show you by the end of this is there is a way to weave monetization, weave money into the experience in such a way that you don't damage it. And so I think you don't have to worry about this scenario, but believe me, it was a sad moment in her life. It was an awakening. So very briefly, I'm going to talk about love and money. I'm going to talk about the challenges you face in product, in organizations, in your own career, and then we'll kind of wrap it at the end. So when I think about designing for love, it's really about creating these layers of value. And if you're lucky in the old days, your product was functional, it was useful and usable, and it kind of stopped right there. I'd say most of the products that I think we work with today kind of fall right about here. You know, if we're lucky, every once in a while, they'll be a little bit delightful to have a little feature that we kind of enjoy. Very, very few products, and I think you could probably list them on one hand or maybe in one finger, really create what I consider desire. That they transition to a product that you love and you can't do without. And that really is where things shift. It's a transformational experience. And that's where you want to be. I mean, that really drives what you consider to be these billion-dollar businesses. It's not going to work if you can't achieve this. And the question is, does their love matter? Is this a touchy-feely thing that some guy from California is talking about, right? I didn't grow up in California, so I actually came to this conclusion. I didn't grow up in Santa Cruz, so it's not all about love. But it does start with love. And I think that love, and when I talk about love, I'm talking about love for a product and really enjoying using a product. It drives engagement, and engagement drives growth. So growth leads to revenue. Real money isn't going to happen before you have growth. Nothing significant. And money doesn't feed directly back into love, at least not in any legal sense, but it does create opportunities. So when you have a product and you have a company that is actually driving growth and revenue, you get the opportunity, the chance to continue to invest in your product and do more of that. When your organization's doing the work that they love, it grows, it has more influence within the company, and you get the opportunity to do more of the work that you love. So it is this virtuous cycle. At Apple, I experienced this during the dark times. So I was there 1995 to 98. I was there with the Gil Amelio years, which are the dark years, where it was not a pleasant time to be at Apple. I think Steve talked about the experiences with the Apple products at that time. Way too many product lines. Things were horrible. If you ever used the products back then, they crashed constantly. And it was a really bad time. And we had our annual conferences, and we would meet people who basically told us that they still believed in us, that they were still buying our products even though they sucked, and they would say that because they had to help us succeed. They knew they were spending too much money on an Apple product, but they literally would say, we're investing in you because I can't imagine a world where I can no longer use a Mac, where I have to use a PC. You guys have to survive. You have to succeed. And I experienced this at eBay, believe it or not. And it really was about the community at eBay. And it was a really interesting experience at eBay Live where you get to meet the sellers. And so these are people who really are the folks who drive the inventory for eBay. And we had people come up to us, and I had somebody come up and they said, can I give you a hug? It's like, okay, you can give me a hug. And she said, I lost my job. I was disabled. And geez, still chokes me up a little bit, sorry. And eBay made it possible for me to make a living. So, wow, okay, that one came out of nowhere. So, love can actually help you grow. So I know not everybody's a big believer in NPS and Net Promoter Score, but they've done some research that shows that the industry leader in NPS typically grows about 2x their competitors. And this is really, will someone promote your product and recommend it to a friend? So, it can be touchy-feely and make you cry, like I almost did, but it actually is good for business too. So how do you do this? So Jennifer Ocker is a professor at Stanford University, and she studies love. She talks about designing for happiness. And she has some really interesting research around brands and what can a brand do to drive what she considers really consumer love, and she calls it awe. And it is about creating these memorable, delightful experiences. It isn't so much that you fall in love with the product itself, you fall in love with what the product enables. Because if you think about products like Twitter and Facebook and even Tumblr, people talk about loving it, but it isn't really the interface. Do you love the Twitter interface? Do you sit there and go, oh, it's so adorable. I can't wait to tweet today. It's about the connections with the community. You fall in love with the fact that you're connecting with all these wonderful, intelligent people around the world, and you're sharing information and you're seeing content that you wouldn't see otherwise. And so that's what you fall in love with. And it is like when I was at Apple, obsessing over those details, those little touches. We obsessed over the acceleration and the smoothness of the cursor track, and we patented all that because it does matter. And it's about being human. So many companies are so worried about lawsuits and saying stuff that's legal and this and this and that. But the companies that could be human in their communication, and you look at their social media and they're being playful and they're actually talking with you through it, they are the ones that consumers fall in love with. And the last one's important because I think a lot of companies have a long way to go to inspire love. They first need to get to the point of you not hating them. I think a lot of companies do a lot of things to make you hate them. So maybe a first step for a lot of companies is to say, okay, what can we do to reduce the volume of hate and then we'll think about getting all the way to love. But make it harder for people to hate you. That's inspiring, right? Stop hating me. So let's go ahead and move into designing for money. I've been in design for a long time, and I started out as a designer. I moved into product management when I was at Yahoo, but so many conversations with designers were this. I don't have to worry about that. Someone else is taking care of it. That's the PM's job. That's the business guy's job. Someone else is handling that. It's a comfortable place to be, but are they really? I mean, you look at a lot of the startups that fail, and this is just one quote. I could give you so many more. Like 90% of tech startups fail. 90%. If you look at that being a failure based on return on investment, it goes up to like 99%. And the number 1 and 2 reasons are incompetence and lack of experience, and people not thinking about the business model. It may not feel sexy as a designer, but it's no fun to be working on a product that people love, to be doing the work that you love, to finally find a job that you love, and then you have to shut the doors in 2 to 3 years. The customers aren't happy either. If they love your product, they want you to stick around, so you have to think about this. I look at the Tumblr acquisition, $1.1 billion. That's a colossal failure. I know a lot of people in the Valley are like, fantastic, great exit. They had over 100 million blogs, 300 million monthly actives, 900 posts per second. Customers who loved it. If you go on Tumblr and look, that community loves Tumblr. They idolize David Karp. He couldn't make enough money to keep the company alive. Their revenue last year was like 12 million. Not even close to their operating costs. They were going to have to shut down. That's a colossal failure. You build a company that someone loves that much, and you can't monetize it and keep it around, and now I don't know what Yahoo's going to do to it. I've seen their track record. So, good business advice from an unexpected source. If you're good at something, why in the hell would you do it for free? And I'm not saying that this is an indictment of the freemium model, because it's not. Basically saying if you have a good service and it's valuable, at some point you should be charging for it. A lot of the folks that I work with on the venture capital side say if someone doesn't want to pay for your service isn't good. Traction without any money crossing hands doesn't mean anything. That means you're not good. Now, it doesn't mean that you basically get lazy and find some way to just slap revenue onto the thing, and something I call revenue cheese. And this isn't delicious Canadian cheese. This is American cheese, which isn't really cheese, and we all know it. And what do I mean by revenue cheese? Well, my good old alma mater, Yahoo, that's revenue cheese, right? Slapping a huge homepage takeover ad on top of that screen. What the hell is that? I go to sign into mail and I see credit card ads and I can barely find the login. But Marissa fixed all that, right? Well, no, apparently not. It's prettier, thank you for the more lovely ad, but that's still revenue cheese. What does that have to do with my experience? And then there's inappropriate revenue, good targeting. I love Louis. I think the guy is actually brilliant. He's very funny. Comedy on this article. Even I was a little uncomfortable saying, really? I don't really feel like laughing right now, but okay. Creepy revenue, because I'm always looking for steel nipples on eBay. It's a passion of mine. But I tell you, take a look over here. What the hell have they done? Look at this. That's my name in an ad, reputational. Creepy. Now I know that I'm being tracked across the entire web. I don't feel good. And again, what the hell does that have to do with my steel nipples that I want so badly? Nothing. And so when you're a designer and you're faced with doing this type of work, you say things like the young designer that worked for me said, I feel dirty. I feel so dirty doing this. And yeah, this advertising can feel dirty. Absolutely can. Crippleware feels dirty. You know, when you disable features in a product that would make it useful and then say, hey, if you want it to work, subscribe. That's not good. You know, these hidden fees that you see, look at the airline industry, Dirty, dirty, dirty. And, you know, it doesn't have to be that way. The guy who created the Net Promoter Score talks about good profits and bad profits, and these bad profits are the ones that come at the expense of the customer, at their goodwill. In the airline industry, they're saying 50% of the customers feel like they've been ill-treated. I'd say it's probably more like 90%. I think that's I don't know where they got 50%, but very interesting statement here from the chairman of JetBlue. They don't charge for the first bag, and he said that's intentional. We want people to be able to board the plane, and we've noticed they can board much more quickly if they aren't trying to carry all these carry-ons onto the plane. Deplaning, the same story. I'm sure you guys have experienced this if you travel a lot. It takes forever to get off the plane now. It's ridiculous. So they don't charge for that first bag, and people are always telling them, you know, you could make another $100 million a year if you charge for that first bag. And he's like, we don't care. That's bad profits. That's at the expense of customer goodwill, and it's not really looking at the lifetime value of that customer. So really what you're trying to create is something that I like to call this virtuous cycle, this ecosystem, where the business is investing in the product, and that product is delivering clear and equal value to the customer, and therefore the customer's like, yes, I will pay you for that. At eBay, we really struggled to keep this virtuous cycle, and we also included this thought that it wasn't just one customer, it was this buying and selling community. We had to keep it in balance. And when the sellers were more successful, and they could sell more items and make more money, that put more inventory into the system so the buyers could find more choice. And they found better prices, and they found that little collectible they'd been looking for since they were a child. And this all fed in a positive way. The more that they bought, the more the sellers listed, they made more money. eBay takes a percentage of the transaction. If they don't gouge anybody, super lucrative business. eBay makes a ton of money. And it's this virtuous cycle. At Yahoo, unfortunately, in search, we had a very different experience. And so if you're familiar with the way search revenue works, you have advertising that's put on the page above the search results and to the right, we call it the east of the search results. At the end of the quarter, when things get tight and you're the business that's driving most of the profit and revenue for the company, guess what happens? You get a call from the CEO. They're like, we need more money. How are we going to do that? Put more ads on the page. And that is one of two things, or even both. Less relevant ads and putting more ads at the top of the page, pushing the results down so that they're finding less of what they're looking for. So you're not thinking about the lifetime value. You're having short-term profits at the expense of losing that searcher. And now they're like, I can't find what I'm looking for. And they go to Google, and you've lost your business. So how do you design? I'm just going to quickly recap. I'm not telling you to design for revenue first, to focus on revenue, because if you don't have a product that people want, if you don't have traction, it doesn't matter. So you do have to design for love first, but think about revenue options. And once you do it, it's easier to get into that mindset of how can I weave monetization into this product in a healthy way? How can I actually harness the power of money? There is power in money. You know, I had the good luck to spend a week when I was at eBay with Pierre Omidyar. He's the founder of eBay. And he talked about how he used money to guide behavior, to discourage bad behavior and encourage good behavior. That he had the listing fee at eBay, not so much at that time to drive a ton of revenue, because it didn't cost a lot to list an item, but the fact he actually had to pay anything kept a ton of fraudulent accounts out of the system. So all these fraudulent accounts and fraudulent items didn't make their way in because you had to put in a credit card and make a payment, kept it out. When we wanted to change the proportion of listing features. So you could bold a listing, you could highlight a listing so it'd show up more in the search results, right? Well, when it was too cheap, the entire page was highlighted in bold and you couldn't see or read anything, so now nothing looked highlighted or bold. And so you'd just dial the fees up a little bit until you get kind of the proportion that you really should have. And it can be tempting when you're making a little bit of revenue to try to make more. You know, you're bringing in this much, and what if we put another ad on the page? So you really have to resist that temptation to be evil. Don't be evil. Don't sit there and say, well, let's dial it up to 11 and we can make even more money. It is very tempting. So let me move on into the challenges you're going to face. So there are these product challenges, and it really boils down to time and money. I mean, doesn't it always boil down to time and money? And I would say a lot of this has to do with an unclear ROI for design. What is the return on investment in design? And that's an investment in money, hiring designers and having your organization. It's an investment in time. they see us as slowing down the process. And Agile has been a bit of a challenge, I would say, for design, and we've had to figure out how do we solve this. Because when they're saying we need mock-ups by midnight tonight so the team in China can start coding tomorrow morning, but you need time to ideate. Design ideation doesn't happen in 24-hour cycles. It takes time. And so you have to find some way to get ahead of the process. And big problem is that design was not always quantified. So you would design something and you weren't sure of the exact impact that design had on the product. And this isn't helped by the fact that sometimes designers just don't want to get involved in the messy details of that. They're not that technical, or they don't want to be that technical. They don't want to understand the product and business metrics. And there would be times I would ask a designer, so what are your product goals with this? What are you trying to change? Are you trying to drive more acquisition, more registrations, more bids, whatever? And I'm like, I don't know. You better find out, because your design should be driving those metrics. And so that is a big problem, and I'd say it's also a problem that on the flip side, the business and engineering and product don't really understand what we do. And so I think there's a little bit of education that has to go back across that side. And a lot of that is really design being vocal. The folks here, like we've heard a lot of people talking about, stand up and have that conversation and be vocal so that they understand who you are. Some things that you should be doing, one is learning analytics. The team at eBay had every single designer trained in Site Catalyst. Every designer knew how to use that to do a conversion flow analysis of the product that they were working on, to look for opportunities. We would see a problem and we'd dive into it and fix it. And one of the big things that we did there, and I don't know if you've heard of this, but the registration product, the registration flow, wasn't really owned by anybody at eBay, which is kind of funny when you think about it. We couldn't track down who the business owner was for that. There are people who own buying, there are people who own selling, but who owned registration? Nobody did, nobody cared. And marketing had come in and put in tons of questions that they wanted to know about the user. It made no sense whatsoever. And so we did that analysis and we saw where there was this huge drop-off in the process at each step of the registration flow. So we redesigned it, we quantified everything, instrumented everything, and found where we recovered all those users. And we were able to tie that to the lifetime value of a registered user at eBay. And eBay was very good about this. They knew exactly the dollar value of a registered user, of a bid, of a listing. So we were able to walk into the CEO's office at the end of that quarter and say, we just made X million dollars for the company doing this. That changes the conversation. It isn't about brand and fonts and colors. It's like, do you want another $25 million this quarter? It's a fantastic way to go in and talk with them about it. And then talk the talk. It's not just talk about product metrics, but also with engineering. When I joined Apple, one of the first things I did, and I was a poor student straight out of college, I bought the entire engineering library of how to design and code for Apple. All the different calls, all the data that was available, everything. I wasn't an engineer. I dabbled, but I bought it and I read it because I was tired of having conversations with engineering where they said, no, that's not possible. We can't do that. So I read the books, and I had a meeting with this engineer that I was struggling with, and he said, oh, that thing you want to do with the design, we can't do it. That data's not available. I said, actually, there's a call that you can make to do that. And I said, it's this. And he looked at me and said, yeah, you're right. Okay, let's make that change. I learned a lot that day. I learned to call bullshit. I learned to make friends with people in engineering who could help me call bullshit. But you learn to talk the talk, and it changes the conversation. When you're designing products and you're coming in and you're saying, okay, what are we trying to solve? And you're talking about conversion, you're talking about user acquisition, you're talking about abandonment and engagement. They love that conversation. And now you're talking about how can you use design to drive the things that their neck is on the line for. And it is. People on the product and business side really care about those metrics. And then finally, it's really important for you to own this. Intentionally design the revenue features for your product. Intentionally design them before someone else does, because I can tell you this will happen. I experienced it firsthand. They will do product placements, and they will do this, and they will do that. The revenue features of your product are as much the part of the experience as the design and the product features. It's not something you can slap revenue cheese on later. It changes how the consumer feels about your product, so own it. The beautiful thing about owning it and claiming it is now you get to claim that revenue. Companies love sales. God, they love the sales team. They give them whatever they want. They love engineering. It's all very quantified, lines of code, bug fixes, accounts, and sales. You do it too. We did this at eBay. We claimed revenue, and we're able to report that every single quarter. It turns you from a cost center into a profit center. So just to recap, make the monetization enhance the experience. There is a way to do that. Buy yourself time for that creative process. You do need it. And so you're going to have to do things like a sprint zero to say, we need time to talk to the customer, to research, to do multiple designs, to iterate and validate before you're saying, okay, I need mock-ups tonight. So you're going to have to step back. When I was at Yahoo, we had to do this for Yahoo Answers. We got into Agile for the first time, and the team was just getting churn and churn and churn. And so we had to create these sprint zeros to allow the team some time to ideate. Speak the language so you can earn that seat at the table, right? Early in my career, there were really important decisions being made about the product and about the customer, and design wasn't in the room. So if you are talking the talk and you know what you're doing and you know how design can drive their success, you get a seat at the table. And it allows you to control your design destiny, to do the kind of work that you want to be doing. When you have these wins and you're driving revenue for the company and now you want to do a huge, ambitious, design-driven project, a big redesign, they're going to say yes. If you come in before you've done anything like that, that's a huge investment. It's a huge risk. And most people are very risk-averse. They're going to say no. So let's move on into organizational challenges. Many of the same things that you face as an individual designer on a product and in your career obviously surface in the organization as well. And it does come back to this issue of people don't really understand UX. Where should it live? Should it live in marketing or product or engineering? Should you report to the CEO or the head of engineering? How should you be structured? Should you be a centralized organization? Should you be matrix? Should you be embedded? All these questions. And a lot of it, I think, stems from a lack of understanding of who you are and how you should be involved in the process. And a lot of the issues you're going to face within the organization is, are we doing the kind of work that we know we are capable of doing and should be doing to really drive success at this company? Do we have the level of influence that we should be having? Are we being involved when we should be involved? And you're going to face politics. It's one of the things that I hadn't really experienced that much as an individual contributor. At eBay, when I moved into management, I became a director. I was like, the first time I encountered it, I didn't know what the hell was going on. And I had a colleague who was much more politically savvy than me. He said, you don't know what's happening? And I said, why are they acting like this? He said, this is politics. Welcome to politics. Because there was no rational reason why this conflict was happening. And then it became apparent to me, he's like, oh, this is what they mean by corporations and organizational politics. It was taken to a whole new level at Yahoo. I moved for the first time into an executive level position, and I had a team of 100, and we were doing work that we loved, and it was shaking up some things. We were making some big changes, we were dabbling with revenue, and people on the business side don't like that. And so politics kind of reared their head again. And so it is a challenge, and there are things you can do to help deal with that. One is something I like to call show the candy. The candy differs based on the exec you're talking to. If you're showing jelly beans to somebody who loves chocolate, you're not going to be back in that room again. At eBay, the candy was money. We called it NPV, net present value, so we could actually quantify for a design-driven initiative the revenue it would drive for the company. And that's really all that the CEO cared about. Didn't matter. As long as we got the engineering resources that we wanted, and we did, for the first time in the history of that company, design had allocated engineering resources. We had our own projects that were tied to revenue. Very different experience than it was years before that. In other companies, it's more about, are you driving engagement? Are you creating an innovative product that people are going to really talk about? Is it a wonderful, beautiful product? Is it something that we feel like will give us a competitive advantage? And I had this experience at one company where it was really interesting that we built a really nice prototype and got into this process of meeting with the executive every week to show the future. So it was something I highly encourage. If you don't have a prototyping team and you're a head of UX or you manage a team, secure one and get a real serious front-end development team. We had some guys that did Ruby on Rails so they could build it very quickly, but they could actually call actual data and make it look extremely real. And we went into this meeting where he said, I just want to show you what we have planned and what we're thinking about doing. He said, okay, what do you want? We said, we don't want anything. I just want to show you what we're planning. He said, bullshit. What do you want? And so somebody on the team said, we need 2 engineers. I was like, don't say that. Don't say that now. And he looked at me and said, you're not getting any engineers. I don't have any engineers to give you for this. So I said, okay, fine, let's just go ahead and go into this demonstration. So we got about 5 to 10 minutes into the prototype, and he turned and he said, okay, you get 1 engineer. I was like, okay, fine, that'll help. We continued, we probably got another 15 minutes into it, and he said, okay, now you get 2 engineers. Show the candy. You know, show them a vision of what is possible. And this is the power of design, right? It's very hard for other people to do this, but you can show stuff that is so aspirational and so out there that, like it or not, and maybe it's not even correct that the executives should want it so badly, but they do. They love it. And it makes a huge difference in terms of your success when you get engineering. If you don't have engineering, everything you're doing is nothing but pixels, right? So it makes a huge difference. The other thing that's really important is reach the top. Go as high as you possibly can in the company. And I don't mean, woohoo, we got a meeting with the CEO once and he met us and it wasn't that fantastic. I'm talking about setting up a base camp so that you are meeting with that executive every week. That is really important. And you got to go as high as possible in the organization because people in the layers in between are taught to say no. And I'm sure you've encountered this, that if you can somehow skip level and get up higher and higher, they say yes. And they are empowered to say yes in a way that makes it happen like right then. Because the problem when this guy says yes is that the next person, she's going to say no, right? And they can't really say yes until their boss says yes. And so these skip level meetings of getting to the top make a huge difference. And we did this. We had meetings every week with the SVP of our entire business unit and showed the candy. You know, that's one of the things that gets your foot in the door. But it also opens opportunities for other discussions. One of the things that I have found to be really important in my career is to befriend HR and PR. And a lot of people hate HR. They're like, oh, HR, all these rules, and they make it really hard for me to hire, and they won't promote my person. Well, you know what? That changes when they're actually somebody you work really closely with. Some of the best people I worked with in the companies, the bigger corporations, were HR and PR. And what do they know long before anyone else in the company knows? When everything's going to change. HR knows when the big reorgs are coming. They know when somebody's going to get fired. They know when positions are going to shift. PR knows. With a larger company, you have to position and you have to have an external facing statement. PR knows. And I worked very closely with PR. So they would come to me and say, hey, you might want to go talk with this person because I hear that things are going to change. And so I had that meeting, and I said, you don't mind if we have a conversation for a little bit before we get started? So I had, 2 of my principal designers were standing outside the room, and so I was talking with him. I said, just in case you're thinking about some organizational changes, and you might be because of what's been happening in the company, I think this is where user experience should live. I think this is where we would be most effective. And it was not reporting to the person I feared, and most likely we would be forced to report to. And he looked at me, and he said, do you have a friggin' problem with him? And he didn't say friggin'. He was very upset. I looked out the window and the 2 designers were standing there just looking like this. And they weren't happy because they had to come in after that. But he was angry. He was extremely upset with me. And I said, I don't have a problem working with him. I love working with him. I don't want to work for him. There's a difference. He was extremely upset. But I had my say, we talked about it, and I thought, where should UX live? Walked out of the room and said, boys, this is going to be fun. So we had the rest of our meeting after that. But the organizational change did come about 2 weeks later, and we didn't end up reporting to that person. We ended up reporting where I thought we should report. And I'm sure that wouldn't have happened unless I'd had that conversation, and unless it was with the person at the top who actually made that decision. The other thing that's really important to affect change within an organization is to share the pain. And I think we all know that showing usability videos to decision makers is okay. Having them in the lab, seeing it live is better. Taking them with you into the field, doing ethnographic research, seeing people suffer in their own home and in the office, it hits you in the gut. And even executives are like, this is bad, we have to do something about this. But One of the things we did at eBay is we brought all the C-level executives, including Meg Whitman, into the lab and made them work through the entire product from start to finish. And it took about 2 weeks to do that. And so they would bid and buy, and they would try to list items and sell them. And it was a horrible experience at the time, horrible experience. And Meg, many times, would turn to the camera and say, fix it now. And we'd been blocked before that. Something about sharing the pain, seeing another human being suffering with your product, has a huge impact. Feeling it yourself, so that you're like, this is ridiculous. Nobody likes to look stupid. And here you are, the executive, the CEO of the company, and you're feeling stupid that you can't even list a product on your own service. That makes a huge difference in terms of how you change things. So just a quick recap. The bottom point is actually pretty important. And that is there are going to be detractors within the company that don't necessarily believe in you or user experience. And it's going to be a surprise. Maybe you've already encountered this. But you're going to find out that the belief isn't commonly held that the better your work and the more great work your team does will be recognized, and you all will have success, people will get promoted, and good things will come to you. There are people who will often do the counter as well. They'll say, if I can make you fail, I will succeed. I hadn't experienced that until I got into a really big company where there was someone actively trying to make us fail to then say, I'll take those resources. I'll take over that project. They completely screwed it up. Let me have it. So meet with these people. Meet frequently with them. If nothing else, you may have a chance to convert them to an ally. You may be able to show them that the work you're doing is actually good for them too and in their best interest. You never know. So let me go ahead and wrap up in the last few minutes with career challenges. So obviously, if you want to make more money, you're going to have to move up. And you really need to think about designing your own career path. No one else cares as much about your career as you do. No one. I don't care how great your boss is. You care more about your career than anyone else. And use your skills, use that power of design to design your own career. Just as you design your products, just as you design your organization, design your career. And you got to be a little careful, though, because it is fun and exciting to plant flowers, but nobody wants to deal with the fertilizer. And if you're not careful as you move up, and I experienced this, you're going to spend more and more time dealing with the fertilizer, which is a necessary ingredient in growing things, but not nearly as much fun as the creative process. So I challenge you to not make the mistake that I did, which was get so far away from design that I hadn't designed for years. And I lost touch with that because I moved into product management. I had a team of like over 100 people all over the world. I had no time to do anything but resource planning meetings. That's all I did, budget meetings and resource and financial meetings, and I never was involved in the creative process again. And that's not a lot of fun if you're a creative person. So you have to work to keep what you love. Whatever it is you love doing, whether you're a researcher or you're a designer, find some way to maintain that. So that's why you have to intentionally design your career. Find some way to keep that as a part of what you do. Stay relevant. Don't come back and say, no, I've got to relearn Illustrator and Photoshop. It's been a long time. That's not fun. So try to keep that. The other thing you're going to have to do is become very confident in what you do and be very bold in the choices that you make, because that will be extremely helpful in your career. These are all design founders. So you go to designfounders.com. These are all individuals who come from a design background that started their own companies, and some of them have been quite successful. You may not always be able to achieve what you want within the confines of the company. Like we said, change the culture or change your job. Sometimes you need to change your job. I found this out. I left Apple. I loved working at Apple, but I did reach a point where Apple was struggling. My boss said, you're doing fantastic work. I'd love to promote you and give you a raise. We just can't now. Well, I just started a family. I said, I can't afford that. So I went to a startup. And unlike what often happens, I actually got a huge raise going to a startup. It's what you call the Silicon Valley promotion. Sometimes you have to leave to advance your career, and that's okay. Sometimes you have to start your own company. If the culture is not what you want, create a culture that is what you want. Design your own company. That's like the ultimate design challenge. Design your own company, design your own team. It's actually really fun. I'm doing it right now, and I'm enjoying it a lot. So, just a few things here. Choose your boss wisely. Be very careful about who you work for, because that will make all the difference and who's mentoring you and allows you the flexibility to design your own career. Once you do that and you know where you want to be, you will recognize opportunities that may have gone right by you before. And I'm telling you, seize it. Don't wait. Don't feel like, oh, I have time, or I'm loyal to the company, because they don't feel loyal to you. It's sad but true. They don't. They're a business. So do what you have to do to be successful. So just to wrap up the closing thoughts, use design. It's your instrument. It is what you do. Apply it to your career. Apply it to your product. Apply it to your life. Design your products to be loved so you'll be memorable. If you're not loved, no one's going to remember you. No one's going to care. Revenue allows you to control your destiny. Don't avoid it. Don't run away from it. Don't let someone else do it. You're a designer. Design revenue that makes your product even more fun to use. Design your organization, like I was saying, to be at the top so that you have influence. If you want to do the work you love and your people want to do the work they love, you're going to have influence in your organization. You're going to have to control revenue so that they want to let you have that kind of influence. Design your work to be successful. And finally, just design your own career to be happy. You know, I've been doing this for 20 years, probably a lot longer than a lot of folks in the room. And it is something that you seek, trying to get promoted, trying to make more money. But at the end of the day, if you don't enjoy what you're doing, all that money doesn't make any difference. It really doesn't. So find a way to weave what you love doing together with making more money so you can be successful and end up being really happy with your choices. All right, thank you.